I'm Rena Subotnik. I'm director of the Center for Psychology in Schools and Education at the American Psychological Association. My background is that I've been a classroom teacher. I have been a professor of educational psychology for teacher preparation program. And for the last 20 years, I've been director of the center here at APA. The mission of the center is to translate psychological science for the education community. And the education community includes parents, teachers, administrators, and school support personnel. The materials and the ideas I'm going to present today were derived for the most part from expert APA members based on the research that they or others have conducted. And my job for most of it was to serve as an impresario. So bringing their talent forth for creating wonderful products that we hope you'll appreciate. This is what we're going to try to do in this short visit with you. We're going to be looking at the relationship between well-being and achievement, give you some ideas for supporting well-being, give you some ideas for identifying some concerning behaviors, and addressing what we call normal anxiety. Now, all of these ideas I'm going to talk about are available for free on the web, and so I'll point that out to you as well, of course. If you'll indulge me, I'd like to point out some of the basics of the education enterprise. Now, I'm not going to be talking about the politics of education, education policy, finance, teacher pay. All of these things are incredibly important, but they're not at the core of what we'll be talking about today. So what is the core? Well, for one thing, there's the content and skills that kids need in order to function well in our society and to pursue their dreams. All of us know teachers we may have had, whether in school or in college, were very knowledgeable, but couldn't manage to deliver what they knew to the class. So content knowledge and skills are super important, they're the base, but delivery of that content or pedagogy or instructional skills is another component that's very important. Even there, we know of teachers, you've seen them yourselves, who are very competent in terms of knowledge, super dynamic and creative presenters, but still a lot of their kids aren't learning. So the third dimension is student engagement and motivation. So we know a lot more about education than we did in the past. And in recent years, we found another area that is essential for unlocking this dynamic, and it's called social emotional learning. Now, I want to make two caveats here. One is it's not the be-all and end-all that's going to solve all education problems, but it does provide us with some really good tools. And the second is that I don't want to give the impression that if we institute social and emotional learning, that will immediately raise achievement, because it's a very dynamic process. For example, if you're not a strong student, you don't feel good about yourself. So it's a two-way street. You can feel good about yourself if you're a good student and feel bad about yourself if you're not a good student. But social and emotional learning can help us deal with improving and getting motivated to improve. I mentioned before very talented members of our organization, and mostly I work with a coalition of psychologists as a volunteer group I have their screenshot here. Usually we have a nice portrait from meeting in person. And they're from all different parts of psychology. Those of you who are not psychologists may not know how broad our profession and our discipline is. We have the counseling psychologists, clinical school psychologists, but we also have people who study development and people who study creativity and people who study learning. And all of these people are represented in this wonderful group of very creative people. One of the tasks that we took on was trying to identify what are, this is kind of an awful expression, but you get what I mean, the drop-dead principles from psychology that teachers really need to know and parents need to know in order to be most effective. So we developed a manual of sorts called Top 20 Principles from Psychology for Pre-K through 12 Teaching and Learning. And this is available if you put this title in, or even Top 20 Principles Psychology, you'll find it, this PDF on the web. It's been incredibly, happily popular, and it appears in 15 languages, and we have a special edition for young children, etc. This, among the top 20 principles, we divided into 5 areas that you'll recognize are really the basics of the classroom, whether it's at home or in school. So we have thinking and learning, motivation, social and emotional learning, classroom management or behavior management, and assessment. And today, I want to call your attention to the social and emotional principles. The first one we'll talk about deals with communication. And classrooms are a very social environment. And in classrooms, I'm using it very loosely here because classrooms could be in a school building. And as we know, this last year, it's also been at home. And communication, really, you think about it in 2 ways. Communication is being able to convey what you think to others, and it's also learning how to listen to others. So let's talk about communication with others. I'm going to use a personal example. I have a grandson who's 3 years old and was born early. He was a twin, one of the millions of twins who've been born recently. And his sister was developing normally, but his communication skills are somewhat delayed. And his emotional life is so fraught because he cannot communicate what his sister can or what others can. And everyone around him really would like to know what he's thinking and what he wants, but he just can't do it. He's doing much better now, thanks to a wonderful program at Boston University. But all of us have experienced this ourselves, where we're sitting around and talking, whether it's in a meeting or in a family group, and we have an idea and we share it and get no reaction whatsoever. And then somebody else says the same thing. And everyone says, that's a great idea, right? That's very frustrating. So not communicating in the way that we want to is a very frustrating experience. Now, we're adults, but children have much lower levels of frustration. It's really important for them to learn how to say what they mean and think about what they mean and to deal with their frustrations. Now, it's not just communicating clearly. Sometimes it's communicating in sensitive ways. And another example from my life, when I was a new teacher, I had a parent come in and start her conversation with me by saying, "Now, honey," and I thought, I'm a new teacher, I am insecure, and I wanted respect. I'd worked so hard to become a teacher, and here is this person calling me honey. And I know that she meant it nicely and affectionately, but it was really shook me up. Now, if it happened now, it would be much less fraught. But there are communications that we inadvertently make. We know about microaggressions. I'm just giving a small, not so heavy example to you to know that even small things that happen can disrupt emotion in a conversation. So what are some strategies that we can work on with children? One of them is really important, and that is to get children to elaborate on their responses. I have observed hundreds of classrooms as a consultant and as part of my job and when I was a teacher educator, and children are not often enough asked to go beyond the monosyllabic response. It's really important to get children to explain how they got their answer and to learn how to be articulate and give, also to do that with others, to ask for explanation from others. So give children opportunities to practice communication skills, whether at home or in schools. And of course, what this means also is that we have to model this kind of behavior. So if we're asking people, except of course in a situation where someone might be in danger, where you say, no, stop now. In other cases, and again, unless the person is 2 years old, explanation to model articulating what you're thinking and feeling and the rationale is very important. Another important quality of a climate where children can experience well-being is a feeling of belonging. So I'm going to, again, you're indulging me here, use an example. I think I'm very funny. But if you ask anyone I work with, and somebody said, do you think Rena is funny? They probably would not. That wouldn't be the first thing they would say about me. But with my family, where I am completely secure, I'm really funny. I mean, people find me extremely funny. So that's an example of, if you feel like you belong and you're totally secure, then you can be your best. You can be creative. You can take risks. You can feel okay if you're not successful the first time at articulating something, that you will be more successful later. Now, I'm not saying that I don't feel secure at work. I do, but I also have to have a certain sense of decorum. But providing an area of safety is very important, and telling children they belong is very important, especially when they're moving into a new environment. Especially if they're moving into a new environment, let's say they're interested in science and you decide you're going to enroll them in a science program outside of school. Well, for the first time, they might meet kids who know more than they do, or who've had more experiences than they have, and they might question, do I belong? It's really important to not just assume they'll figure it out, and for the instructor and the parent to say, you definitely belong here, and we're happy you're here, and we want to work with you. So we want to be able to teach emotional self-regulation using the vocabulary of emotion. I feel angry. Do you feel angry? Is there something I can do, et cetera? And we model these appropriate emotional expressions. But we can also teach children to take a breath, and it's not used often enough. I'm going to give you an example a little bit later about how in music education this is used to deal with performance anxiety. So just keep this in mind. There are different ways in which we can help children to regulate their emotions, and that's very important and very developmentally important for maturity. One activity you can do is to develop stories with children with fictional characters facing similar dilemmas to the ones that they're facing now, but make it different enough so it's not about them. And as soon as you make it not about them, they'll be able to talk with you about how that person could solve the problem. It's very easy to do, and it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun to be creative, and it's a lot of fun to see how creative your child can be in addressing this. So I have an example here of Sharon wins a contest. And this is a true story that I've seen, she's invited to be on the local television station. She notices that some people are really happy for her, and others who used to be friendly suddenly, I guess the new word is ghost her. So what should she do? Okay, so I've told you a bit about the top 20 principles in the social and emotional learning components, and I hope you'll explore them further. Another project is called Mental Health Primers. And they are 2-page documents that perhaps will develop into something more than that, into interactive activities. But for now, they're 2-page documents that serve as resources for parents and teachers to help them look for and observe behaviors of the children that they're working with. So, and children who might need more support. So they're not, it's very important, they're not intended to help you label behaviors in any way as a diagnostic tool. They're not designed to replace formal assessments or the expertise of your mental health professionals in the school. But there are many things that you can do that can intervene with not heavy duty activities that in the classroom that you're concerned about or at home. We have several topics for these, and this is just what's up on the website so far, but we're creating twice this number, and I think you would find them very helpful. I'll give you a second to look at the topics. Okay, so what does a primer look like? It defines the topic, and what I think is incredibly valuable is it shows how it might be expressed by children of different ages. So stress shown by a kindergarten child is going to be different than one for a middle school child. So this is very helpful to see this developmental changes. It talks about what teachers and parents can do, provides do's and don'ts, and references and links to other resources. So for example, starts off by what is stress? We tend to associate stress with something very negative, but it is a natural response to change. So if you're asked to do something you've never done before, and especially if you're not prepared to do it, it can be very stressful. Some amount of stress is beneficial and can motivate children to perform better. I mean, people will say that if you have no stress at all, you're probably depressed. Okay, it's just part of the human condition to feel stress. But too much stress, even if it's associated with a positive event, can be counterproductive. So stress can be short-term in response to, let's say, you're going to speak in front of an audience, and it can also be more powerful in long-term, such as dealing with death or divorce or the pandemic. So as I mentioned, the next part is how is it expressed by students, and you can see here how stress is typically expressed by students at different ages. I'm going to move on because you can get these easily online, but I wanted you to get a sense of what this looks like. Then we have do's and don'ts, and it's important to read them horizontally because the don'ts are in response to or in contrast with the do's, and they make more sense that way. So for example, addressing a behavior that's disruptive publicly is usually counterproductive. Sometimes you can't help it, but if you can help it, it's much more important to speak to a student or a child privately. And in school, it's important to keep the door open, but speak quietly and privately. Then the last part is urging you to review school policy, have in your phone book school counselor, psychologist, school worker, other personnel. Know who they are in your school because they're incredibly helpful. And then we have some affiliated resources. Okay, dealing with normal anxiety. This is what I work on personally because I find it very fascinating, and I spent 3 years observing in music conservatories. And I thought, wow, this is so different than what happens in schools, that what can we learn from it? So I'm not a musician, I'm a psychologist that went in there to just, what are they doing here? And I'm doing this with Frank Worrell, who's our president-elect of APA, and Paula Olszewski-Kubilius from Northwestern University, just so you know. Okay. So what are the activities that students normally experience that makes them anxious? And there are tests, and it could be a high stakes test like an SAT, but it also could be a classroom test for a teacher that you care about, or in a class that makes a difference where you'll end up next year, or whether you can go play sports after school. Public presentations can be terrifying. We know this is one of the top 10 things that adults are terrified of. And then there's competition. It could be a science fair, or it could be competing with others in the class and thinking about, well, how do I rate here? So again, these are the things of dreams. Don't you, some of you still wake up thinking you missed a test? It's something very deep anxiety that people experience. And I say this lightly because when children are thinking about this, they think they're alone and that they're the only ones who are worried about how they'll perform, that they'll let people down, that they'll fail. So we try to say this is a component of social and emotional learning, but it's a little segment of social and emotional learning that's designed to help individuals have courage to express their creative ideas or performances. So social and emotional skills are those that are for everyone. And these skills are for situations where you're going to be performing. And we'd like to see them employed more widely in school situations and have parents use them at home. So here's an example in music. This is from the Juilliard School. Those you may not be familiar with it, it is a music conservatory in New York City, focused mostly on classical music, but also jazz and other forms of music. And it has a university component and a pre-college component. And I won't talk about the university component now, but in the pre-college component, for kids from age 4 to 18, I found it completely fascinating that one of the courses they can take, they don't have to take it, which they do in the college, but with the younger kids, they have this course, Psychological Skills of Top Performers. So it's based on what has been learned from sports psychology to help musicians achieve optimal performance levels under pressure of recitals, auditions, competitions, how to manage nervousness, deal with doubts and worry, focus better, and perform at a high level in stressful situations. I want to enroll. Don't you? I mean, shouldn't everyone have access to this? Now, I mean, these are kids whose lives are about performance, so they really need it. But I think, as I mentioned before, kids are dealing with performances all the time in school. They're dealing with tests, they're dealing with competition, and they're dealing with public speaking, even if it means standing up in class and giving a report. So I'll just give you a couple of examples of how sports and music psychology have been addressing some of these performative skills. So one really important thing for athletes, is to screen out distractions. Think about when you're out there and there's a tie and one person is out there, has to get the basketball in, and that would change the whole game. Nothing's moving, it's just you out there. Can you imagine how easily a distraction, someone yelling, would shake you up? So athletes practice, some of them do, there are many techniques, but one is to practice with headphones where people are trash talking you. So you get used to it. One person who used to be the head of the Institute for Education Sciences, the most important government research agency for education, had dreamed of being a musician, but he was so frustrated by having to play in nightclubs in order to survive. And he said, I just couldn't take being a potted plant. That's what he felt like, was because people were chatting and talking and drinking, and it was so hard to play under those circumstances. Well, children also have tests that they have to take, and there are kids who will be clicking pens, or a clock will be ticking. There are just so many different ways that the children can be distracted. And so it's important to talk about it explicitly and to talk about practicing screening out distractions. You can learn to not hear distractions. Another idea, and this doesn't derive from sports, it derives actually from academics, is that it was discovered that people can be more productive when they have a group task if they first go off and think for themselves and then come back and compare notes, rather than the teacher saying or the parents saying, okay, go solve this problem. For many children, they can't think when everyone's talking at once. But if you have a a little while to go back and think, and then come and discuss your ideas, it's been found to be much more productive and much more susceptible to high achievement. This has been tried over and over again, particularly in mathematics. The other antidote to anxiety is practice. Nobody likes to do it. However, if somebody tells you what the goal of practice is, not just that it's good for you, is the goal is to achieve whatever it is you're practicing to the point where it's automatic. Okay, so you can see an endpoint there. If I practice my scales to the point where it's automatic, or my multiplication tables, or my Spanish grammar to the point where it's automatic, I can start to do much more interesting things. So, but without practice, if you practice, you can get to the point where you're not as nervous. And I like to point this out. It's a YouTube video called Surgery for Dummies, Training Tomorrow's Doctors in Canada. And it points out that practice is not just about memorizing equations or state capitals, but surgeons, who are some of the most high status people in our society, have to practice and practice and practice doing surgical techniques. And this shows how, fortunately, now we have elaborate dummies to work on, where they can practice safely without hurting anyone or using a cadaver. So performance and all these other fears is about helping children to feel like they belong, that they can eventually master something, and that most of us have these experiences and they can be addressed. All of them are teachable. Some people are better at it to begin with than others, but all of us can learn how to do these. And most important, we may not be the ones to teach them, a parent at home or a particular teacher in school, but it's a very important message for these fears to be made explicit. And that is that we all have these fears to some degree or another. There are ways to help, some of them simple, some of them more of an investment, and that it's normal to have these fears. So in sum, we'd like to leave you thinking about attention to using social emotional skills at home and in school to support student learning and achievement. I hope I've given you some ideas for that. We'd like you to help children in your classes or at home by making normal human fears explicit, so they don't have to worry alone. What a terrible waste of time to be sitting and thinking I'm the only one who's afraid of doing this or is comparing myself to others in a negative way. Please look for our resources. And if you have any specific questions, I would urge you to contact us. You can reach me and my colleagues at CPSE, that's our Center for Psychology in Schools and Education, at apa.org. Please look at our website. APA also has a fantastic resource website for parents with all kinds of information for all kinds of situations. Thank you.